Monsieur le directeur, chers collègues, je pense que nous sommes prêts pour lancer cet événement. Donc, monsieur le directeur, je vous laisse la parole.
Merci beaucoup, chers amis, chers collègues. Je suis très heureux qu'avec nos collègues portugais, nous ayons aujourd'hui la possibilité de vous accueillir pour cet événement anniversaire qui marque les 20 ans de l'adoption des articles sur la responsabilité de l'État pour faits internationalement illicites. En cette période de débat intense au sein de la 6e commission, je tiens sincèrement à remercier les délégués new-yorkais pour leur participation à cet événement. Rencontre également ouverte aux participants issus des milieux académiques ainsi qu'aux experts dans les capitales, que nous saluons. Et nous pensons en effet que nos travaux s'enrichissent de discussions entre juristes de plusieurs horizons. Cet événement nous permet de mettre à l'honneur la Commission du droit international, représentée aujourd'hui par deux de ses membres éminents, Madame Patricia Galvão Teles, que je salue très amicalement, et Mathias Forteau, membre français que je salue bien sûr aussi très amicalement, tous les deux membres expérimentés, reconnus, et tous les deux candidats pour le mandat 2023-2027. Nous sommes convaincus que les travaux de la Commission constituent un pilier toujours aussi important de la consolidation de l'état de droit au plan international, qui est une valeur cardinale pour nos pays. Je profite de cette introduction pour rappeler tout particulièrement l'attachement de la France à la Commission du droit international. Je tiens à saluer l'ensemble de l'œuvre accomplie par la Commission, ainsi que sa contribution décisive à la codification et au développement progressif du droit international. Le rôle de la Commission est aujourd'hui d'autant plus précieux que s'accumulent des défis pour l'autorité du droit international sur lequel repose notre cadre multilatéral commun. Avant de céder la parole au professeur Pierre Bodeau-Livinec, qui modérera les échanges, je voudrais rappeler, comme l'a fait tout à l'heure Brice Fauda, que vous êtes invité à bénéficier pleinement de l'interprétation en anglais et en français au cours de cet échange. Donc, n'hésitez pas à choisir la langue qui vous convient pour intervenir ou écouter. N'hésitez pas aussi à demander la parole dans le chat ou en levant la main, et des sessions de questions-réponses sont prévues à l'issue de chaque panel. Merci en tout cas aux participants, merci à ceux qui ont aussi contribué à l'organisation de cet échange, à la mission. Merci aux interprètes qui nous assistent. Et maintenant, cher Pierre, je te laisse à présent le soin de lancer ce très bel événement. Merci à tous de votre attention. Pierre, à toi.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le directeur, cher François. C'est un plaisir, effectivement, pour moi de vous retrouver ce soir à Paris et ce midi à New York pour ce bel événement. Je remercie également Madame Susana Vaz-Pato qui, tout à l'heure, viendra conclure nos débats. Et je la remercie d'avoir aussi soutenu l'organisation de cet événement avec la mission française et le ministère des Affaires étrangères français. François Alabrune vient de le dire, les articles sur la responsabilité de l'État pour faits internationalement illicites fêtent leur 20e anniversaire. L'Assemblée générale a pris note de ces articles adoptés par la CDI la même année, dans la fameuse résolution 56-83 du 12 décembre 2001. 20 ans, c'est un bel âge c'est un bel anniversaire, malheureusement, il faut le dire, terni par la disparition cette année, comme vous le savez, de l'un des pères fondateurs de ce texte, le juge James Crawford, qui malheureusement nous a quittés le 31 mai dernier et pour lequel, je crois, nous sommes beaucoup à avoir une pensée ce soir. Alors, à l'heure de faire un bilan d'étape sur ce texte et sur la commission qu'il a enfanté, je crois qu'il y a un contraste qui se fait jour entre le statu quo, au moins apparent, qui entoure le texte, et la dynamique qu'il continue d'inspirer. Le statu quo, ou l'apparence de statu quo, a, de mon point de vue, une double origine. De manière très évidente, depuis 2001, le débat au sein de la 6e commission de l'Assemblée générale sur la forme finale de ce texte, ce débat n'a guère évolué et rien ne permet de penser qu'il sera définitivement tranché lorsqu'il reviendra à l'ordre du jour de l'Assemblée générale l'année prochaine. Plus généralement, il semble que dans la lignée des articles de 2001, la commission du droit international s'attache désormais, je dirais, à produire des projets qui relèvent d'une forme de codification douce, une soft codification, plutôt que des fameuses conventions de Vienne qui ont fait sa réputation dans son histoire. Pour être peut-être immédiatement moins perceptible, il me semble que la dynamique inspirée par les articles de 2001 est réelle. Elle se manifeste d'abord au sein même de la commission, qui a continué à s'inspirer non seulement du contenu de ce texte dans ses travaux ultérieurs, mais aussi, je crois, des méthodes de travail qui avaient été développées à l'époque dans ses travaux contemporains. Mais cette dynamique, bien sûr, elle dépasse très largement le cadre même de la commission, et elle concerne la pratique du droit international elle-même. Rarement, je crois, un texte aura été aussi utilisé par les juridictions internationales que ces articles de 2001 qui pourtant relèvent formellement de la soft law. Ce texte, il a ouvert la porte d'un royaume dont certains territoires d'ailleurs restent encore à explorer. Derrière la responsabilité, responsibility, se cache, de moins en moins d'ailleurs, la liability et l'accountability. Nous avons donc des très riches débats devant nous et pour aborder ces différents thèmes, nous avons sollicité 4 orateurs qui sont tout à fait éminents et je les remercie d'autant plus d'avoir accepté notre invitation que eh bien, nous sommes tous pris et ils sont très pris par des activités très denses et pourtant ils ont pu dégager du temps dans leur agenda pour évoquer ces thèmes. Je les présenterai dans l'ordre dans lequel ils interviendront ce soir, en commençant par Madame la professeure Danae Azaria, qui est professeure associée à UCL, University College of London. Interviendra ensuite le professeur Mathias Forteau, qui est mon collègue à l'université Paris-Nanterre et membre de la commission du droit international. Puis c'est Madame Patricia Galvão Teles, qui est professeure à l'université autonome de Lisbonne et également membre de la commission qui interviendra. Et j'en profite pour saluer particulièrement Patricia, qui, ce n'est plus un secret maintenant, co-dirige avec moi la préparation d'un commentaire des articles de la responsabilité, sur la responsabilité, un commentaire article par article, dont nous espérons très fortement qu'il sortira en 2022, publié par Oxford University Press. Patricia sera ma partner in crime pour ce beau livre qui s'annonce. Enfin, sera avec nous le professeur Fernando Lusa Bordin, qui est professeur assistant au Sydney Sussex College de l'Université de Cambridge. Nous aborderons ce soir 4 thèmes. Le premier, je le donnerai en anglais. Le titre du premier, c'est Has the ILC proved faithful to the articles on state responsibility in its successive work. Le deuxième sera la question de savoir, should the ILC consider other forms of responsibility? Le troisième thème sera de savoir si, after the articles on state responsibility, should soft codification become the usual practice of the Commission? Et le dernier thème, the final topic, will be what next for the articles on state responsibility within the General Assembly. La professeure Azaria traitera du premier thème, le professeur Forteau du deuxième, la professeure Galvão Teles du troisième et le professeur Bordin du dernier. Pour faciliter les débats et les échanges, chacun des intervenants interviendra brièvement sur l'un des thèmes avant que les autres orateurs puissent réagir eux aussi brièvement. Et puis, bien sûr, le débat sera ouvert à la salle. Je demanderai à tous, y compris à celles et ceux qui poseront des questions, bien sûr, de poser des questions, de ne pas hésiter, mais en restant concis, car nous avons un temps limité. Et je vous demanderai également de parler lentement. J'espère que j'ai moi-même parlé suffisamment lentement afin que les interprètes puissent suivre nos débats le plus facilement possible. Sans plus attendre, donc, je donne la parole à la professeure Danae Azaria.
Bonjour, bonsoir, good afternoon. I'm grateful to the permanent missions of France and of Portugal for inviting me to speak on this timely panel about the ILC articles on state responsibility on their 20th anniversary, alongside renowned experts, including two members of the International Law Commission who are candidates for re-election, Professors Forteau and Galvão Teles. I wish them both good luck in the upcoming elections. Both have made significant contributions to the work of the Commission, and if re-elected, they would undoubtedly continue to do so. I have been asked to discuss whether the Commission has been faithful to the articles subsequently to their adoption in 2001. Now, before analyzing the main four approaches that the Commission has taken in the past 20 years, I will explain why this question has profound implications for the persuasiveness of the articles, but also for the persuasiveness of the Commission. Faithfulness speaks to consistency and adherence to scientific methodology. That the Commission relies on the articles in later topics supports the persuasiveness of the articles over time, but it also indicates that the Commission bases its work on method rather than on capricious assessments about what the law is or what the law should be. It thus also bolsters the persuasiveness of the Commission as an expert body. To be clear, faithfulness does not mean that the Commission should never depart from the articles, nor does it mean that the Commission should mechanically reproduce the same wording in future work. Rather, it means that if the Commission departs from the articles, it should do so on principled grounds and it should explain transparently its reasoning. For instance, it may be that the law has changed since 2001, or it may be that the Commission, in considering the new legal environment in which state responsibility is to be applied, it considers that new legal developments should be proposed. Now, in my view, allow me now to move to the Commission's approach in relation to the articles. So between 2001 to 2021, the Commission has concluded its work on 16 topics, and it is currently working on 5 topics that have not yet been adopted on second reading. In almost all these 21 topics, the Commission has referred to the articles and has been faithful to them. But importantly, it has also built its work around them and borrowed from them. Now, in my view, the Commission's faithful approach to the articles in its subsequent work can be classified in 4 categories. First, what can be called modeling. When the Commission has dealt comprehensively with a field that is substantively similar to the scope of the articles, it has relied on them as a model in terms of structure and substance, making mutatis adaptations and additions. This is the case of the 2011 articles on the responsibility of international organizations. Second, in some topics, the Commission acknowledges that the application of the rules on state responsibility remains intact and that its output should be read together with the articles. This is the example of the draft guidelines on provisional application of treaties, or the Commission includes a non-prejudice clause pursuant to which the subsequent output is without prejudice to the rules on state responsibility. And this is the example of the draft principles on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict. Third, in some instances, the Commission relies on some articles to draw support for its reasoning on a particular point in its later work. For instance, in its 2018 conclusions on subsequent agreements and practice in relation to treaty interpretation, the Commission borrows from the articles the term conduct in order to define subsequent practice of treaty parties for the purpose of treaty interpretation. Or in the provisionally adopted articles on state succession, in respect of state responsibility, it follows the definition of international responsibility in Article 1 of the Articles on State Responsibility. And fourth, what I call reproduction. The Commission reproduces some articles into its subsequent work. And a paradigmatic example of this approach is conclusions 17 and 19 of the draft conclusions on use cogens, which deal perhaps with the most contentious articles on state responsibility, namely Articles 40 and 41 on the particular consequences of serious breaches of use cogens norms, Article 48 about the entitlement of states other than the injured state to claim reparation in the interest of the injured state or other beneficiaries of the obligation breached, and also implicitly touches on Article 54 on measures taken by states other than the injured state. Now, this fourth approach, I think, is the most interesting approach of the Commission to the articles because it brilliantly contextualizes some of the main concerns, challenges, and opportunities that the Commission faces when it considers how to approach specific articles with a 20 years distance, when the law may or may not have changed, and when states may need, and in fact even call for clarification or interpretation of some of these articles, or even clarification about the normative state of the rules therein. Let me give you an example. The text of the draft conclusions on use cogens reproduces faithfully the text of the articles on state responsibility. However, the commentary of the draft conclusions states that the Commission considers that the duty to cooperate to bring an end to a serious breach of use cogens is now customary law and no longer an instance of progressive development as it did in 2001. So I will stop here, and I hope that we can reflect on these issues further during our discussion.
Thank you very much, Danae. That's already a lot in a minimum time and a lot to food for thought. I don't know if who wants to speak. Patricia has asked for the floor, and then Mathias afterwards. Patricia, please.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre. Et c'est vraiment un grand plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, même si on est ici d'une façon virtuelle. Ça a l'avantage de pouvoir avoir les participants à partir de New York, aussi des capitales, mais aussi des milieux académiques, comme M. Alabrune a soulevé. Et c'est vraiment un grand plaisir de discuter avec vous de ce sujet qui est tellement important pour la Commission, pour la 6e Commission, mais aussi pour l'Académie en général. Et je voudrais remercier en particulier les missions du Portugal et de la France, mais aussi des ministères des Affaires étrangères avec les départements d'affaires juridiques, avec M. Alabrune et Mme Susanna Vashpat. Et aussi, c'est un grand plaisir d'être avec des chers collègues, chers amis, des personnes avec qui je travaille d'une façon régulière, que je connais depuis longtemps, et comme Pierre a soulevé, avec qui, pour l'instant, on est un peu tous partners in crime dans ce nouveau projet de commentaires un peu atypique, parce qu'on va discuter les articles de la responsabilité internationale ne sont pas encore une convention, et ce n'est pas très orthodoxe de faire un commentaire sur un texte qui n'est pas une convention encore, mais pour son importance, on a décidé de le faire. I'm going to switch very quickly to English because I wanted to react to what Danae said. In the sense, I fully agree with the analysis that she has made, which is very useful and very much to the point, and it does reflect also for my experience in my first mandate in the Commission, especially working on the topics of state succession in respect of state responsibility and use co-organisée. But I would add a further example, which is probably an example that might be sensitive and might be interesting for discussion also in the perspective that we have the second reading of use co-organisée topic coming up next year, which is the annex. Then I mentioned the conclusions, but an important part of the use co-organisée draft conclusions, it's the annex that lists the norms, an illustrative list that norms that the Commission considers to have use co-organisée status at this moment. And here I think also it was very much based on the work that the Commission had done previously, first on the law of treaties and secondly on the law of state responsibility, with a plus, with a certain desire, and this was very much discussed in the Commission, and the annex is a bit of a compromise solution of an upgrade of putting what the Commission had in the commentary in the articles on state responsibility here in the annex to the conclusion. So I would add also that point, because I think it is an important point to think about, because this is going to be something that certainly during the second reading and on the basis of the state comments will be discussed. So I'll stop here and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think I agree very much with what you just said. Mathias, please.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And it's indeed a very great pleasure to be here tonight with all of you and to share some thoughts on this very important topic for the international rule of law. And I wanted to thank sincerely the mission and the state of France and Portugal for the organization of this event, and also for the benefit of having interpreters for this session. So it's very good for the UN to have this kind of event, both in French and English. And I think this is a way for have more thoughtful discussions on this topic with all the subtleties, of course, of this topic. I will switch to French because we have interpreters, and je voulais simplement faire peut-être deux remarques additionnelles et je remercie Danae pour ses remarques qui sont tout à fait justes. J'ai notamment beaucoup apprécié la référence faite à l'idée de consistency dans le travail de la Commission, et c'est vrai que la Commission est toujours très attachée à cette idée de consistency. Mais je crois que par ailleurs aussi, la Commission s'est montrée parfois trop fidèle et parfois pas assez fidèle au projet d'article de 2001. Trop fidèle d'abord parce que dans certains projets d'articles, on trouve simplement une répétition de ce qui se trouve dans les articles de 2001, alors que peut-être dans ces branches spécialisées du droit international, il aurait été utile que la Commission examine dans quelle mesure le droit de la responsabilité mérite peut-être d'être adapté. Et je songe notamment à trois projets, deux qui ont été achevés par la Commission cette année, sur l'application provisoire des traités d'une part, et sur la protection de l'atmosphère, où il y avait peut-être des spécificités en termes de droit de la responsabilité. Et le troisième est un sujet qui viendra en deuxième lecture l'année prochaine, la protection de l'environnement en relation avec les conflits armés, où là encore, il existe une disposition, le principe 9, qui renvoie au projet d'article de 2001, tout en disant qu'il est sans préjudice des articles de 2001. Donc il y a peut-être ici une ambiguïté que la Commission devra certainement lever l'année prochaine. Je le disais par ailleurs, la Commission n'a pas été totalement fidèle à ces articles de 2001, puisque dans les articles de 2001, la Commission a laissé des questions en suspens et elle a créé peut-être ici des attentes pour les acteurs internationaux, des attentes que la Commission aurait dû combler peut-être depuis 2001 et qu'elle comblera peut-être d'ailleurs. C'est le cas notamment du régime applicable à l'indemnisation, qui est une question très importante en pratique. C'est également la question, évidemment, de la responsabilité vis-à-vis des individus, qui est une question de plus en plus centrale dans l'ordre juridique international. Et puis, c'est le cas également, mais la question est beaucoup plus controversée, du droit applicable aux contre-mesures collectives, qui est peut-être un sujet très important aujourd'hui à l'heure où l'unilatéralisme tend à menacer le multilatéralisme. Il est important que la Commission peut-être réévalue ce type de questions à l'avenir.
Merci beaucoup, Mathias. Oui, d'ailleurs, on peut faire un retour historique pour dire que, pour reprendre le dernier point que tu viens de faire sur la question des sanctions, on se souvient que la Commission avait même hésité à traiter de la question des contre-mesures dans le projet, puisque à l'époque, certains ne voulaient pas du tout entendre parler des contre-mesures, et ça a été l'une des grandes avancées de la Commission d'inclure, enfin je parle à titre strictement personnel bien évidemment, mais d'inclure la question des contre-mesures pour en codifier le régime. Et je trouve très intéressant que Danae soulève le fait que among the articles which are still debatable, there are articles 40, 41 on the crime, the ghost crime, 48 on the non-injured state and the rights of the non-injured state in specific cases, and 54 on this kind of countermeasures which are not directly countermeasures. So it's also the function of the Commission to be, sorry to take your categorization, Mathias, but sometimes it's the role of the Commission to be unfaithful and to explore new venues. And so there is a balance to strike. And I, as an observer, I think it's not always easy to strike the fair balance. But we have had examples of duplication, reproduction, as Danae has just said. I'm not sure they were always convincing, but sometimes exploring new venues is also very important. And in a way, this is, we may turn now to the second topic, this is what you're gonna explore, Mathias, by explaining that beyond responsibility, there is also other forms. But before we go to the next topic, I will give the floor to Fernando and then to Danae, because she has the right to speak again, of course. Let me just say that we will have an open debate, as I said earlier. Don't be too shy. You may very well signal, you already ask your questions in the chat, or signal that you may want to ask questions or to make comments. It may not necessarily be a question. And we'll take these questions once we have covered briefly the four topics. But please don't hesitate to take the floor if you want. Just signal it to us later on. So I give the floor very briefly to Fernando and then to Danae to conclude on this first issue.
Thank you very much, Pierre. I just wanted to make a point about what you have just said about situations in which perhaps faithfulness is not what we should be expecting from the ILC, especially if it's working on the basis of draft articles. I recall that from the project on the responsibility of international organizations, there were moments in which the ILC was considering the 2001 draft articles as served as a model for the 2011 articles. And it noted that there were a few problems with the drafting, or a few provisions that could be redrafted in a way that makes them more clear or more workable. But there was a sense that if the Commission were to make any changes to whatever text it is reproducing, that would give rise to lots of questions and doubts and what it means and what it doesn't. And that, I think, was one of the reasons that made the Commission perhaps renounce the opportunity to perhaps improve on its own work. So I thought that was a very interesting point, and I just wanted to speak to that.
Thank you very much, Fernando. I'll make that point. Danae.
Just perhaps just to comment on the great, thank you very much for the comments. I completely agree with my co-panelists on this. The point about being faithful and being too faithful, I think I was trying to, in fact, point to this exactly. But I think that especially in relation to the issue of third-party countermeasures, there are a few states that have been reacting to the Commission's position so far, suggesting perhaps this is a missed opportunity because you're implicitly suggesting something, and they are, so the Commission is implicitly suggesting something about lawful measures again that can be taken unilaterally, but it is not really clarifying the most thorniest issue in the room, which is third-party countermeasures. Since 2001, things may have considerably changed. the point about whether the Commission has been faithful in relation to, for instance, the duty to cooperate, considering it progressive development in 2001, but not anymore in 2019, I think that despite the fact that there is departure, there's still some faithfulness. So the way that we consider what is faithful and what is not, we need to constantly be aware that whenever departure exists, perhaps that's actually part of the faithfulness of the Commission to the articles, but I'm proposing a new assessment about what the law is at the moment in relation to the articles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danae. With no further ado, we're going to go to the second topic because time is flying already. So Mathias, beyond responsibility, other forms of responsabilité to consider maybe for the LC.
Merci Pierre, et évidemment c'est un sujet, une question délicate à appréhender, et je ne voudrais surtout pas que mes réponses à cette question, la Commission devrait-elle envisager d'autres formes de responsabilité, je ne voudrais pas que mes réponses soient vues comme un moyen de mettre de côté les articles de 2001. Les articles de 2001, la responsabilité au sens classique du terme demeure tout à fait fondamentale pour l'état de droit au plan international, pour la sanction des violations du droit qui peuvent être commises. Et comme la Cour l'avait rappelé, la responsabilité est le corollaire nécessaire du droit, et donc il est important de défendre, de ce point de vue-là, les articles de 2001. Mais je pense que dans le même temps, il est nécessaire aussi de réfléchir à d'autres formes de responsabilité qui viendraient non pas se substituer à la responsabilité au sens classique du terme, mais qui viendraient la compléter, la préciser sur certains points, et peut-être aussi l'accompagner dans sa mission qui est d'assurer le bon respect du droit international par les États et par les organisations internationales. Et je crois que de ce point de vue-là, si l'on veut parvenir à une meilleure effectivité du droit international, il est nécessaire de multiplier les outils et peut-être de multiplier les formes de responsabilité internationale. De ce point de vue-là, je crois que l'un des points centraux des enjeux contemporains en la matière est de s'éloigner peut-être d'une conception de la responsabilité classique qui est toujours tournée vers le passé, vers la réparation essentiellement de ce qui s'est passé, pour se tourner davantage vers l'avenir. Comment la responsabilité internationale, comment de nouvelles formes de responsabilité internationale peuvent permettre de mieux gérer l'avenir des relations interétatiques ou l'avenir des relations entre États et individus ou avec des organisations internationales. Et sur ce point, je voudrais faire trois séries de commentaires qui seront les trois éléments de réponse que je souhaiterais apporter à cette question. Premier élément de réponse ou premier type de commentaire, je pense que la responsabilité ou d'autres formes de responsabilité doivent être approfondies de manière à mieux accompagner les États dans la mise en œuvre du droit international. Mieux accompagner les États, à certains égards, les notions de liability ou les notions d'accountability, qui sont malheureusement intraduisibles en français, puisqu'en français, nous n'avons qu'un seul terme, qui est le terme de responsabilité. On pourrait les traduire, mais ce serait sans doute du mauvais français. Ces concepts-là, je crois, sont très utiles pour nous faire comprendre que la mise en œuvre du droit international est une question qui se pose sur le long terme et qu'elle nécessite des mécanismes qui ne viennent pas sanctionner à un moment donné seulement le non-respect du droit, mais qui permettent également d'aider les États à réaliser cette mise en œuvre du droit international. Et je crois que ces concepts-là nous permettent notamment de mieux imbriquer, de mieux combiner le juridique et l'opérationnel. Et on trouve la trace, par exemple, de cette idée dans la Convention cadre sur les changements climatiques de 1992, qui demande aux parties de prendre des mesures pour prévoir, prévenir ou atténuer les causes des changements climatiques et en limiter les effets néfastes. Donc l'idée est bien d'avoir une action opérationnelle qui permette de limiter les changements climatiques, les dommages, plutôt que d'avoir une vision un peu binaire qui serait celle de la responsabilité au sens classique du terme. Ma deuxième série de remarques vise à relever qu'il faut tenir compte par ailleurs sans doute de la nature propre de certains dommages. Les articles de 2001 appréhendent la responsabilité à l'égard de tout type de dommages, mais il y a peut-être des dommages particuliers qui appellent des formes particulières de responsabilité. Et j'en mentionnerai deux. Les premiers, ce sont les violations des droits de l'homme et les dommages qu'occasionnent ces violations des droits de l'homme. Il y a à l'heure actuelle, notamment, tout un courant doctrinal en faveur de ce que l'on appelle la responsabilité transformative, transformative responsibility, qui consiste notamment en cas de crime de masse à faire en sorte que les mesures de responsabilité permettent de reconstruire les sociétés, d'assurer une forme de résilience sur le long terme des sociétés. Et je crois que ces réflexions sont très utiles pour compléter de ce point de vue-là les articles de 2001, tout en gardant par ailleurs le bénéfice de ces articles de 2001. De même pour ce qui concerne le droit de l'environnement, et la Cour internationale de justice l'a relevé en 2018 dans l'affaire Costa Rica contre Nicaragua, s'agissant des dommages environnementaux, il est parfois difficile d'établir la causalité, notamment en raison de l'incertitude des connaissances scientifiques. Et je crois que cette incertitude qui tient à la causalité ne doit pas empêcher toute forme de réalisation du droit international. Là où dans la formulation classique du droit de la responsabilité, la question de la causalité sera un frein définitif à la mise en œuvre de la responsabilité. Là encore, je crois que ça va nous conduire peut-être à des réflexions renouvelées sur la manière dont la responsabilité ou de nouvelles formes de responsabilité doivent être mises en œuvre en matière de droit de l'environnement. Et puis, troisième et dernière remarque, nous avons en droit international une présence de plus en plus forte du soft law, du droit doux, du droit mou. Nous avons par exemple de plus en plus d'accords non contraignants qui sont conclus sur la scène internationale, non-binding agreements, qui produisent tout de même des effets juridiques. Et la question que l'on peut se poser est de savoir si, à côté de cette soft law, il ne faudrait pas développer des mécanismes de soft responsibility, des mécanismes de responsabilité douce, des mécanismes de responsabilité atténuée, dont on trouve déjà certaines formes, par exemple dans le mécanisme du panel d'inspection de la Banque mondiale, ou alors dans le protocole de Montréal, s'agissant du droit de l'environnement. Donc là encore, c'est peut-être une nouvelle frontière pour le droit de la responsabilité qui permettrait, dans le même objectif, parce que c'est ça au fond le plus important, de faciliter la bonne réalisation du droit international, non seulement la bonne application du droit international, mais aussi une meilleure effectivité concrète du droit international. Voilà, je m'arrêterai là pour cette présentation. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mathias. Là aussi, une intervention extrêmement riche. Je ne sais pas qui veut prendre la parole pour réagir sur ce point. Alors, Fernando, et puis après, Patricia. Fernando, je t'en prie.
Thank you so much for those very thoughtful remarks. I think that the 3 points you have identified, Professor Forteau, they really, in a way, remind us that this one-size-fits-all regime that was the starting point to come up with a workable set of general default rules that apply to responsibility, they are, in a way, or it is a starting point. It is a beginning, but it's not necessarily the end of the discussion. And one might expect the secondary rules of state responsibility to become a little bit more refined, a bit more sophisticated, a bit more specialized. And there is absolutely nothing in the practice of states and our shared experience that should prevent that outcome from happening. So again, that was really inspiring.
Patricia? Ton micro, s'il te plaît. Your mic, Patricia, please.
I'm very sorry. I just wanted to make a very short remark that what Mathias' very interesting comments have made me think of. I've been thinking a lot and also speaking about it and trying to write something also because of the work in the Commission that I'm developing together with other colleagues and the study group on sea level rise in relation to international law, and in a way, how the Commission, for its future work, because I think the question of, the future work of the Commission, the future topics of the Commission are really an important question at this moment where a lot of work has been done. But this idea that I'm more and more convinced that although international law is essentially reactive and crisis-driven, it needs to be now for the future, with the current challenges, more proactive and more preventive. And these points that Mathias was making, they ring this bell that I've been thinking, because it's, there are some challenges that the international community is facing now, that the good solution is not an ex post facto solution, and state responsibility is something that it's naturally and historically, and the way it was codified by the Commission, something that comes at the end when the wrongful act has been committed, and as a measure for reparation. But at the same time, I think it brings the point that, and this was the point that Fernando was making, that the work that the Commission has done on responsibility, even if it was already completed by different other projects, and many of them were mentioned by Danae in the first intervention, it's still incomplete. I think there's still room for the Commission to do with the question of responsibility, what it has done also with law of treaties, which is to pick certain aspects and to take them further and to develop them further. There's currently a topic that is in the long-term program of work, which is about reparations for violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. That would be an example, but I'm sure that we can pick other examples. I'm not going to expand on that now, where we could look where the articles are maybe incomplete and they could still be completed. So I think that those 2 points, that the work is not fully done and then we have to think in a more proactive way, those are very important points. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia. If I may, if there is no with a request for the floor, I will give Danae, and also Danae first, and then I will say something before Mathias take the floor back again. Danae, please.
Patricia has already preempted part of my comment. I think indeed the articles on state responsibility, like my talk indicator to some extent, has some space. There is still some space for the Commission to work on. But in terms of the particular proposals by Professor Forteau, I think these are both the transformative responsibility aspect and the issue of soft responsibility. These are issues that really relate to global challenges, and we need to start seeing the Commission as the right place to deal with these issues. I think that given its nature and its tools, this is the place to be able to address these issues. Thank you.
Mathias, before you react, maybe just say one word of maybe it's a side comment, but I don't know whether I completely disagree with you, but maybe you were a bit too pessimistic when you said that in French we do not have the possibility to translate the word responsibility and accountability and liability in all its dimensions. But it's true if we, for example, look at the Montego Bay Convention. If you look at Article 235 of the Montego Bay Convention, in French it's responsabilité, the title, and in English it's responsibility and liability. So we have a problem for sure. But I think it's also a way to show that here also the Commission is useful. And the Commission is useful as a UN organ with the possibility and the need to work in the 6 different languages, with all the difficulties involved in finding correspondence. But I think even in this formal way of dealing with the topic of responsibility in all its dimensions, we should keep this the usefulness of the Commission and its diverse membership at stake. Before we move to the next topic, Mathias, maybe one word of a conclusion.
Just one word. I totally agree with you. And when you have a problem of translation, it's many times a problem of substance and not of translation only. Well, many thanks for all your very valuable observations. Just one last word to say that the articles were adopted in 2001. And since then, we had a lot of case law of many, many different courts and tribunals in different regions of the world. And I think to reassess the contemporary case law and responsibility would perhaps give a different picture than the one that was driven the Commission in 2001. So I think what Patricia said, that we need to update sometimes the work of the Commission on specific aspects of the project, are a very important remark, and it has been done for other topics, the law of treaties. It should be done perhaps for the law of responsibility.
Just, I'm always concerned by time, but I think we are on the right track now, and I will give the floor to Patricia to introduce the third issue we wanted to deal today, that is, after the articles on state responsibility, should soft codification become the usual practice of the Commission? Patricia, you got the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre. The question of whether after the articles on state responsibility should soft codification become the usual practice of the ILC, I would say it has, but I would also say it doesn't have to be, or it shouldn't be. And I'm going to try to explain, because we have about 5 minutes, in 5 points what I'm trying to say. And this is because I'm not going to have time to say everything I want to say. I have written in a symposium by the Agile Talk blog on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the articles. I've written something a little bit more detailed, and for those that might be curious to have a bit more detail, I will refer you to that. So my first point is that it was really this decision to take note that was suggested by the Commission to the General Assembly. It was not the General Assembly that took that decision. It was a suggestion by the Commission that really inaugurated all this debate about soft codification or codification light, to use the expression of Santiago Villalpando, or the paradox between form and authority, a phrase coined by David Caron, or one that I like to quote by one of our dear panelists, Fernando Lusa Bordin, the question of non-legislative codification. So it was the Commission itself that, as a result of a compromise that was formed within the Commission, sort of created this own debate about the soft codification. And of course, this my second point is that this decision has indeed had an important impact on the Commission's subsequent work. If we do a comparative analysis and a statistical analysis, we see that this compromise formula of the two-step approach, so first to ask the General Assembly to take note of the articles, and then at a later moment to consider whether the articles should become a convention, has influenced greatly what the Commission has done subsequently. So in the last 20 years, and Danae mentioned initially that the Commission has worked on 16 topics. So it's very interesting that before 2001, the Commission had produced 16 draft articles that had the recommendation of becoming a convention. And after 2001, it also produced 16 products, but half of them, other forms were suggested. And in half of that that means in 4 plus 4, in 8, 4 were draft articles with also the two-step approach proposal, and only 4 were suggestions of draft articles to be followed by a convention. And those 2 cases are still before the 6th committee, the protection of persons in the event of disasters, and the draft articles on crimes against humanity. So this has certainly greatly, and we just look at the numbers, we just need to look at the numbers to understand what influence this had an impact on the work of the Commission and the subsequent forms. But it also has influenced greatly the way the 6th committee approaches the work of the Commission and the outcomes of the Commission. And it has to be noted that in the last 20 years, only one convention was concluded on the basis of articles prepared by the Commission, and this is the 2004 Convention on Jurisdictional Immunities of States and Their Property. And what we've seen so far is since 2001 with the articles on state responsibility, but also with many other outcomes of the Commission, the so-called technical rollovers of 3 years, which I think, and we can come back to this in the discussion, and I'm sure many delegates from the Sixth Committee that are listening will understand what I'm saying. These technical rollovers do not really help the discussion, because every 3 years, it's like the discussion would start from scratch and from zero. So this has also influenced, in my opinion, the way that the Sixth Committee, the fact that it doesn't have to take action immediately on draft articles, it also conditions how the Sixth Committee works with regards to the outcomes of the ILC. And the fourth point is that because of the situation, another impact has been the fact that the Commission has sought other outcomes for its work, and more. And so what we see now in the active agenda of the Commission, more and more we have principles, conclusions, guidelines, etc. So at the current agenda of the Commission, and I'm still counting the 2 projects that were adopted this year in second reading, we had in 8 topics, 6 topics that were in other forms rather than draft articles, and only 2 in the form of draft articles, which is the case of state succession in relation to state responsibility and immunities of state officials. And I think in these 2 cases, even for the Commission, and I'll make another point on this in a moment, even for the Commission, it's not very clear whether there will be a proposal for a conclusion of a convention. But I think, and this would be my 5th point, that it is important that the Commission continues to contribute to hard codification and not just soft codification. And I refer to the background poster of Fernando's, for those that can read the fine print, that says, keep calm and codify. I think this is something that the Commission has to do. I think we still have to think that the role of the Commission, it's not the only one, because the studies, the guidelines, the principles are important, but the role of the Commission is also to produce hard codification, to produce texts that have the potential to become conventions. And I would highlight that the draft articles on crimes against humanity, and I know that the delegates of the Sixth Committee will leave from this meeting to go to informal negotiations. I hear that there are some encouraging developments. It's not going to happen immediately. It's not going to happen this year, certainly. But it's important that I think the Commission proposes draft articles, and that the Sixth Committee takes those proposals seriously. And perhaps, and this will be my last remark, on immunities of state officials, where the Commission has been working in terms of draft articles, but without enough clarity about whether this draft articles should be accompanied with a recommendation and that they should become a convention. Perhaps this is something that we have to also consider here, a bit of a reverse compromise to what happened in state responsibility, where the compromise was not to propose a convention, and perhaps here an idea to explore for a compromise would be to propose that these draft articles become a convention. So I look forward to the comments that other colleagues may have.
Je vois que Mathias a immédiatement envie de réagir sur la soft codification, après avoir parlé lui-même de soft responsibility tout à l'heure.
Merci Pierre et merci Patricia, avec qui je suis très largement d'accord. Je pense qu'effectivement, il est important que la Commission continue aussi de proposer des instruments juridiquement contraignants qui ont 2 avantages. Le premier, c'est que ça permet à la 6e Commission de se positionner plus simplement en termes de négociation contre ou pour tel ou tel nouveau texte. C'est le premier avantage. Et puis le deuxième avantage, c'est que ça permet aussi à la Commission d'arriver peut-être plus facilement à des solutions parce que la Commission, dans ce cas, est moins contrainte par la méthodologie du droit coutumier. Il s'agit plus d'une activité de treaty making que d'une activité de codification. Et à certains égards, c'est parfois plus facile. Et je crois que le projet sur les crimes contre l'humanité a été, au fond, plus facile à codifier que ne l'est peut-être aujourd'hui le sujet sur les immunités. Ma deuxième remarque, très brièvement, consiste à dire que tout dépend évidemment des sujets. Et je crois qu'il faut que la Commission maintienne aussi plusieurs cordes à son arc. Tantôt des projets qui visent simplement à des restatements, à déclarer ce que dit le droit pour aider les utilisateurs du droit international, parfois à développer progressivement et prudemment le droit international. Et là, la soft codification est très utile et parfois, au contraire, peut-être avoir une activité davantage de treaty making. Un dernier point, juste très brièvement sur les aspects opérationnels. Je pense qu'il y aurait peut-être deux améliorations qui pourraient être apportées sur ce point en relation entre la Commission du droit international et la 6e commission. Le premier serait peut-être de laisser passer une année entre l'adoption en seconde lecture par la Commission d'un projet d'article et le débat en 6e commission, ce qui laisserait le temps aux délégations de bien saisir la portée du projet adopté par la Commission en seconde lecture, plutôt que d'avoir simplement 1 ou 2 mois pour se positionner en 6e commission. Et puis le deuxième point serait pour assurer peut-être plus de transparence, que les projets de soft codification soient publiés en même temps que les commentaires des États dans un seul volume, de manière à ce que les utilisateurs aient à la fois le produit final de la Commission et les commentaires faits par les États en 6e commission, ce qui permet ensuite aux utilisateurs de mieux mesurer la portée réelle du travail élaboré par la Commission et d'avoir ensuite la pratique des États et l'opinion juriste disponible sur tel ou tel sujet. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mathias. Je ne sais pas si Danae ou Fernando.
As the chair, do you think that we have enough time?
I think we have time for we have 2 minutes. So if you want to intervene, yes,
okay.
You can. Danae.
I just wanted to point out. I think Patricia's points are absolutely valid. Perhaps one this new kind of movement towards not having only draft articles, but having a big area of different draft conclusions, principles. And guidelines will raise different challenges for the Commission, and I think it might be useful for the Commission itself to perhaps take the initiative to clarify how it's using these different terms, and if these different terms really mean something about the hierarchy or the substantive, let's say, content of the draft conclusions as opposed to draft principles. And I think that some of the states at the moment, the 6th committee do raise this point. It's a valid point, but I think it's a strength for the Commission to take an initiative to clarify it, because of course, at the end of the day, non-binding instruments really entail that their authority will come from their content. So irrespective of whether they're called the conclusions or guidelines or principles, it is really the content that will matter. And the second point is, and connecting it to all the 3 so far topics that we discussed, there is a question as to whether the Commission will be able to deal with an interpretation, as I have called it elsewhere, codification by interpretation of the articles on state responsibility, whether it should do so through draft articles again, or should it do so through draft conclusions or not? And that's another point that the US, especially, and Russia are raising in relation to the jus cogens topic and the topic of state responsibility. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Fernando, please.
Just a very quick comment on something that Professor Forteau has mentioned about how soft codification can be updated a little bit in this proposal for delegations or for the comments of states to be printed together with the ILC materials. That is definitely an interesting proposition, but something that I would be very curious to hear perhaps from the delegations themselves is My impression is that the Sixth Committee is a very free space in which states can talk freely and really speak their mind about what the ILC is doing. But if there were some pressure for states to put on the record what their position is for the purposes of publication, would that make codification easier or more difficult? In some senses, perhaps codification by treaty, as Professor Galvão Teles was mentioning before, it at least, I think, invites states to compromise, to show that they can converge, that they can agree on things. Whereas I really wonder how the dynamics would be if states started to be, their opinion started to be publicized together with the output of the Commission itself.
Sounds like a comment and a question, maybe. I don't know whether Patricia wants to intervene on that. Before she does, and we conclude on that topic, let me also say something. I remember listening to this debate and the former debate, I was thinking of this old song, Killing Me Softly with his song. Maybe we should be cautious about soft codification, because soft codification may become harder in time. I see that in the audience, and I really greet them with a lot of friendship, my former colleagues at codification. And I should say that sometimes soft codification does not end with the adoption of the articles themselves. When we think of publishing, for example, the comments by governments, I think of this very useful compilation of decisions by international courts and tribunals on the articles on state responsibility, which is requested by the GA and which the codification division performed. And I want to thank them publicly. It's for us, it's a wonderful document for academics, but also for practitioners, in a way that soft codification may hardens by the way that international court and tribunals work with the articles, turn around them, interpret them. We may not agree with the way one tribunal interprets or applies, but the point is there is a dynamics in this text beyond the adoption of the text, even as a soft instrument. Maybe Patricia, you want to conclude on that before we move to the last topic?
Sure, and I'll try to be brief because this is indeed, I mean, a fascinating discussion. And I think it's one conversation that we have on a regular basis, but it's important that we have it because these issues are constantly on our table, and they're part, and for the Commission, I mean, they're part of our own self-reflections. And I would say, just briefly, I mean, on the points that were raised, the question of the mix of forms, of the different outputs, I think it's very healthy. I think it's very healthy, but what I don't think it should happen is what the question implies, that, you know, the Commission should give up trying to do texts that have the potential to become conventions. I think that's the important point. But I think there are different subjects that deserve and they merit because of their nature, because of their stage of development, and they might warrant different forms. And for that purpose, also on the point that was raised about, you know, the Commission clarifying the use of principles and guidelines and conclusions, this is something that we've started doing in the Working Methods Working Group. We started doing it during this quinquennium, and I think there's a lot of goodwill to continue this important work, because we see not only for the Commission, but also for the outside world, and especially for member states, that it would be an important output also for the work of the Commission to try to clarify in a more transparent way and also to reflect better. The other point about what Fernando was raising about, you know, how do we, you know, if this would be a good idea or not to have the state position together with the soft instruments. I think this is a point that you know, we always raise the issue of the interaction, increasing the interaction and improving the interaction between the Sixth Committee and the ILC. And this, again, I think it's a point for discussion. I'm sure that we can do, and Mathias presented some useful suggestions. I'm sure, and I think we're all committed to improving the way we work, to improving how the work of the Commission is perceived by the outside world, to explain better, to make it easier, to make it more accessible. I'm particularly aware, also having been on the other side as a Sixth Committee delegate, that to understand the work of the Commission, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not easy. You need to really know what you're doing, and I'm sure that we can improve our methods of work also in this respect. So with ideas that can come from the Commission, but also certainly from the Sixth Committee and from this dialogue, and also inputs from academia, because it's always very useful to have a neutral eye and inputs, and the work that Danae and Fernando are doing as academics is also very important in this regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I know that, as you have mentioned yourself, delegations have some informal consultations starting soon, so I don't want to take too much of that time. We have last topic and a most interesting one, and I noticed that our colleague Federica Padeou, whom I salute very well, has already asked a question, which is actually in relation to what Fernando is going to talk about, that the future of the RCOA within the General Assembly, and if there is a possibility of a convention, would it be a copy-paste exercise, or would it be an opportunity to reopen the text? Fernando, maybe you take the floor now, and after that we'll have one reaction and we'll open the floor for a general debate. Please do not hesitate to ask questions already, as Federica has done. Please, Fernando.
Merci por l'invitation. Muito obrigado pelo convite. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Then my question is, what is next for the articles on state responsibility within the General Assembly? Now, if this had been a side event commemorating the 10th anniversary of the articles, my answer would have been, to be honest, there's not much going on at the General Assembly. But as you know, since 2016, the question of the future status of the articles has picked up the pace, and the debate has been both lively and polarizing. So far, 3 potential outcomes have been discussed. Option 1 is to negotiate a convention based on the articles. Option 2 is to adopt the articles in the form of a declaration or a resolution of the General Assembly. And then option 3 is to leave the articles as they are, at least for the time being. There doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for option 2, so the choice seems to be between going for option 1, a convention, or option 3, leaving the articles as they are. And of course, each of the 2 solutions has advantages and disadvantages, which the delegations at the Sixth Committee have been arguing about with a lot of passion, I would even say. On the one hand, a successful convention would add to the legal certainty and, crucially, to the legitimacy of the articles, also rescuing a sense that states have a primary role to play in codification projects. On the other hand, it is undeniable that the articles have acquired a good reputation with the international legal profession, and there is a sense that it might be best not to try to fix something that is not broken. At the minute, my reading at least of the discussions is that a growing number of delegations seem to favor a convention. But as Pierre said at the beginning of this event, the debate is far from settled, especially if the Sixth Committee continues to follow the practice of taking decisions by consensus and not jumping the gun. What can we expect in the short term then? It seems that some changes to the structure of the debate itself are looking more and more possible, with delegations potentially agreeing to discuss the topic more often and making greater use of informal debates to inject some momentum into this discussion. But it also seems that for a decision on status to be made, delegations will have to come to a position where they trust that they share a vision of what the substantive goal of a convention on responsibility would be, on this very delicate and difficult balance between continuity and revision that needs to be struck. Some delegations seem to have the hope that a diplomatic conference would fine-tune the ILC's draft and produce a triumphant instrument like the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties. And who wouldn't want that? That would be absolutely fantastic. But others fear that disagreement over issues, as mentioned before, of jus cogens, standing to sue in the collective interest, countermeasures, disagreement will be such that we might end up with a treaty resembling the Vienna Conventions on succession in respect of treaties and state property from the late 70s and early 80s, which were not an altogether happy ending for those codification projects. And to be honest, I sincerely don't envy those of you who will be making this decision, because in some ways, the Sixth Committee finds itself in an unprecedented position. The articles have been around for 20 years. The articles are widely used. And it is a bit unclear if this experiment in soft codification that Professor Galvão Teles was telling us about before is making codification by treaty more likely to succeed or more likely to fail. It could be a massive help. It could be a bit of a hindrance. Now, if the convention option is pursued, an interesting question that arises is what scope the convention should have. And I say that because one of the advantages of states embarking upon an ambitious realm of codification of state responsibility is the prospect of adopting a comprehensive treaty covering a lot of ground when it comes to the law of international responsibility. A treaty that is not only covering state responsibility, but also diplomatic protection and the responsibility of international organizations. That would be a monumental undertaking. And as somebody who is observing and watching things happen from academia, I cannot wait to see what the next chapters of this ongoing conversation will be. Merci beaucoup again.
Merci, Fernando. I think I share some of your views. It's a very intricate, we have been a lot to work on this issue, and it would be very interesting to listen to the delegates. There are some in the room to see their position on this issue. Yeah, we academics have a view on that, but there is a lot to be said on that. Maybe before opening the floor, we have questions on the third topic to Patricia by Ms. Tonani. I will read that question later. Maybe I should give the floor to one panelist if someone wants to react before we open the floor to the general debate. Who wants to react to Fernando's points?
I think you make a good suggestion, Pierre, to open the floor to delegations.
But maybe Mathias wants
to. Professor Forteau has raised his hand. I'm sorry.
Maybe.
J'allais justement proposer que comme nous sommes à l'intersection des présentations et du débat et à l'intersection de la commission et de la 6e commission, c'est effectivement peut-être le bon moment d'ouvrir cette séance de discussion pour avoir également le regard des États sur cette question qui est évidemment cruciale.
Tout à fait, Mathias. Je vais donc ouvrir la discussion. Je voudrais juste répondre au point que vient de faire mon ami Chanaka Wickramasinghe, que je n'ai pas vu depuis longtemps, qui nous dit qu'il has to leave for the 6th committee. I hope there is a recording that will be available. My understanding is that yes, there will be a recording available. Maybe the French or the Portuguese mission can confirm that, but my understanding was that there would be a recording of this session afterwards available. Maybe I will read the first question. I've already read the question by Federica Paleo, and maybe you want to tackle on that. But I think Fernando has already mentioned that point. Let me rephrase that, and I hope Federica will not will forgive me for that. The point is that do we take as granted the text as it is, or if we enter into a conventional exercise in the writing of the convention, do we reopen some issues, including those which were signaled by Danae earlier as being the most debatable one? I'm not sure they are as debatable as they were, but my own sense on this, but that's only my personal sense, is that beyond the text itself, there is a merit for states to consider seriously the treaty as a mean of ownership, to get ownership on such a topic. And I may suggest that the fate of responsibility is more important and probably better than the fate of state succession, and responsibility happens more often than state succession. Then we had a question to Patricia put by Ms. Tonani, which I'm going to read. I would like to know from Patricia Galvão Teles if a possible turn back to hard codification by the ILC wouldn't undermine its authority, considering that topics such as use cogens are not ripe for codification and that states may not embrace hard codification on environmental issues, for example. Hard codification for every topic? Patricia.
Clearly not. I think I said that. I think this is the question. I understand very well the question. It's a very legitimate and interesting question, but I think that it's very clear that the idea, although in the past, the Commission indeed was in the path of proposing drafts for conventions, this was at a moment where international law was not mainly codified. It was based on customary international law. We're talking about law of treaties, law of the sea, diplomatic relations. So in the beginning, of course, it made sense historically that most projects were of hard codification. And this is not the case now. And this was not what I was advocating. And I fully understand the question and the examples that were given. I think there has to be a careful choice. I think there has to be a mix of forms. But my main point was to say, and this was a bit, I think, the inheritance of state responsibility and this this two-step approach, was that the impact was that the Commission for some time shied away from topics where it should propose a hard codification. And my point is that the Commission has to think, and in dialogue with the Sixth Committee and with member states, because I think this dialogue is very important, what topics could be ripe for hard codification. And this is something that there isn't enough examples, and maybe we could have more examples where the ILC is tasked by the Sixth Committee, by the GA, of drafting something, as it has happened in the past, or where member states also voice that desire. But it's ultimately, of course, also up to the Commission to make that balance between the topics. So I'm not advocating hard codification for everything. The second question is, I think, one that we've been debating for a lot, and I'll leave the floor to my colleagues, but I think the point that you made, Pierre, about ownership, I think it's very important. I mean, the International Law Commission is not a lawmaker. States are the ones that have the power to make international law. And through leaving the Commission with its soft codification, they put the Commission in a place that was not intended initially. And that generates misunderstandings. And so I would think that, a process, and there are ideas. I mean, I've also written about the containment strategy, how to start, what to do in order to try to start with the draft that we have, which I think the most obvious thing, and think of ideas to avoid that the balance that was struck by the articles, which is a point that often comes in the discussion, and that we don't have reverse codification, so the undoing of what was in. I think there are strategies to do that, to have at least a frank conversation, an open debate, something that should be, in my opinion, but on a more regular basis than it is currently, so that we can really evaluate what are the possibilities of turning the articles into a convention, because I think this is really a question of ownership of member states. So I would end here And I thank very much the participants also for the great questions.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for this very clear answer to these 2 points. Again, I encourage questions from the floor, but I see that Mathias has something he wants to put and comment on.
Merci Pierre, et à moins qu'il n'y ait pas de questions, je voulais simplement réagir aux réflexions très intéressantes de Patricia, en disant que je crois également qu'il faut tenir compte du fait que l'époque a changé. Dans les années 50, 60, 70, il y avait très peu de décisions judiciaires internationales. Et notamment pour le droit des traités, le besoin était d'avoir une règle du jeu qui soit claire pour tout le monde. Et l'instrument du traité était très important pour cette raison-là. Je crois qu'aujourd'hui, le monde est tout à fait différent. Nous avons un foisonnement de décisions judiciaires internationales, l'accès à la pratique est facilité. Et dans ces conditions, je crois que la codification aujourd'hui a également pour rôle de clarifier le droit applicable, un peu ce que j'appellerais la codification boussole, la codification qui nous permet de nous repérer dans le monde du droit international. Et je crois que l'exemple du jus cogens, c'est un très bon exemple. Nous avons la règle du jeu dans la Convention de Vienne. La difficulté aujourd'hui, c'est de comprendre comment est-ce qu'elle fonctionne et quelles sont les difficultés que pose son application. Et ce genre de question n'est pas facilement traitable en quelque sorte en quelques dispositions. Il faut des projets de conclusion, des commentaires détaillés pour répondre à l'ensemble des difficultés qui se posent. Et je crois que c'est l'une des difficultés aujourd'hui de la Commission du droit international, et c'est également le nouvel enjeu pour le XXIe siècle, de réussir à être dans une approche de dialogue avec les juridictions, avec les États, avec le monde universitaire, pour permettre à chacun et à chacune de mieux se repérer dans la très grande complexité du droit international contemporain. Donc je pense que les parallèles avec les années 50, 60, 70 sont utiles, mais ils ont aussi, dans une certaine mesure, quelques limites compte tenu de l'état actuel du droit international et des enjeux contemporains.
Merci Mathias. Oui, quand on parle de ownership ou d'appropriation, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, je crois qu'elle fonctionne à plusieurs niveaux. Il y a la question de l'appropriation d'un texte par les États. Les États ont un avis sur les questions dont on parle. Peut-être que certains des points qui étaient discutables lorsque les articles ont été adoptés ou dont on pouvait penser qu'ils allaient donner lieu à débat. Danae a parlé de l'article 48, mais l'article 48 a donné lieu, peut-être de manière surprenante d'ailleurs, l'article 48 a donné lieu à de la jurisprudence internationale. Donc, il serait intéressant d'avoir bien sûr le point de vue des États sur ces articles, mais on peut aussi voir la question de l'appropriation d'une autre manière. Les questions de responsabilité se posent tout le temps aux États et elles vont se poser de plus en plus. Parce que comme Fernando l'a dit, il faut aussi s'interroger sur le périmètre des articles sur la responsabilité, qui est un périmètre limité. Ce n'est pas les articles on state responsibility, c'est les articles on state responsibility towards states and the international community. Alors, je ne vais pas du tout faire un cours, mais je pense que l'appropriation, c'est aussi le fait que les États sont confrontés à des questions de responsabilité qui peuvent venir de sujets autres que les États, et que le projet, les articles sur la responsabilité, leur donnent un socle de réflexion. Désolé de me laisser emporter par le débat. Il nous reste peut-être 1 minute pour une dernière question ou une dernière remarque avant que nous puissions conclure avec Madame Susana Vaspato. Non? Tout le monde est heureux. C'est l'heure de déjeuner à New York et de dîner à Paris. Ça doit être ça. Alors, s'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, je vais demander à Madame la directrice des affaires juridiques du ministère portugais des Affaires étrangères de bien vouloir conclure cet événement. Madame Vaspato, vous avez la parole.
Vous m'entendez maintenant? Merci infiniment. Et j'aimerais tout d'abord commencer par remercier nos collègues français pour cette excellente coopération dans l'organisation de cet événement. Je remercie également le modérateur et les panélistes pour leurs interventions extrêmement utiles, extrêmement intéressantes et une discussion très importante. Bien entendu, je remercie également les deux candidats à la réélection de la CDI, de la France et du Portugal, Mathias Forteau et Patricia Galvão Teles. Vos interventions ont été excellentes et ont, je suis sûre, élevé tout ce débat. It's really not my intention to draw conclusions of the discussions today, but I would like to make just a couple of very brief points. You mentioned all the benefits, the merits, and also the difficulties of these articles. As you all have said, the articles of state responsibility have been an important milestone of the ILC work in the past 20 years. Their relevance has been confirmed by state practice, but also by case law of international courts and tribunals. Whether these articles should or not become an international convention, it's obviously an open question, which is again before the sixth committee, the agenda of the sixth committee next year. For our part, Portugal has been extremely committed to promoting intersectional discussions on this important matter, so that the sixth committee can have a thorough and informed debates on this point of the agenda, with more or less success, as you all have noticed. Like in other activities we have promoted in the past, we trust that this side event can once more contribute for a better understanding of the role, the limitations, or the potential of the articles on state responsibility, and advance the discussions in the framework of the sixth committee. I would also like to finish by mentioning that for Portugal, the International Law Commission continues to be a very relevant expert forum with its mandate of codification and progressive development of international law. We attach great importance to the work of this commission, and we follow closely its work on all topics. We also believe that the credibility of the Commission and its role in the development of international law is at stake if the sixth committee is unable to find a way, an outcome to these articles. So I think that, as many of you said, the responsibility in this case is in the hands of the states. And I sincerely think that we should do more. Merci à tous pour ce bel événement. J'espère que nous avons converti d'autres qui nous ont écoutés et que l'année prochaine, nos discussions seront bien plus faciles sur cette question. Merci à tous.
Merci Madame la directrice d'affaires juridiques. Je crois nous sommes exactement dans le bon temps, donc je ne vais pas prendre davantage de votre temps. Je vais laisser les universitaires réfléchir ou manger. Je vais laisser les praticiens négocier pour ceux qui sont en 6e commission et en négociation informelle. Je voudrais simplement remercier très sincèrement celles et ceux qui nous ont aidés à organiser cet événement, notamment Monsieur Brice Fauda, la mission permanente de la France, et Madame Élise Servat. Je ne cite pas tout le monde, mais je veux les citer car ils ont été vraiment très très actifs ces derniers jours pour organiser cet événement, ainsi que les 2 interprètes qui nous ont très utilement aidés pour faire de cet événement un événement plurilingue. C'était vraiment important pour nous, Monsieur Bertrand Sibéras et Monsieur Alain Schuster. Voilà, je vous remercie beaucoup à tous et je vous souhaite un bon après-midi à New York et une bonne soirée à Paris, en Europe et au Portugal et partout ailleurs dans le monde. Au revoir.